Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. I have to admit, I'm very confused in terms of what is the deadlines that President Donald Trump has imposed on Mexico in regards to tariffs. There's been different deadlines. President Donald Trump, during one of his press conferences, gave two different dates, and there's different types of tariffs that the president has threatened to impose, not only on Mexico, but on Canada and the world. So to try to kind of walk us through these threats and what are the deadlines, joining us today, I really appreciate him joining us here on Living in Mexico, is Jorge Molina. He's a consultant on international trade. Jorge, please walk us through. There's supposed to be one deadline next week, and there's another deadline the week after that, and then there's a deadline in April. I have to be honest, I'm very confused. Welcome to the show, and please help us understand.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's very confusing because there's actually 5 different tariffs that Trump has talked about. There's one 25% tariff for Canada and Mexican products, a general tariff on all Canadian and Mexican products that would kick in next Tuesday, March the 4th. That it's official because that has already been published in the Federal Register. Then there is another one. There is a 25%, an additional 25% on all steel and aluminum products that would start a week later, March the 12th. And that would be for all countries around the world, but certainly with a major effect for both Mexico and Canada, since Canada was the U.S. major provider of steel and aluminum last year, and we were the 3rd provider of steel products to the United States. Those are official. Now, there are 2 more threats which have not been made official. There's the threat on reciprocal tariffs, which would be applied on a country-by-country basis. And those would be announced most likely in the month of April. Trump requested information from the USTR, Treasury Department, Commerce, and Homeland Security departments in order to design these tariffs. But again, this is a threat. They have not been published yet. And then there's another threat of another tariff of 25% on all foreign automobiles, which would kick in also supposedly in April for all countries that import cars into the United States. This is important because last year, 41% of all sales of new automobiles in the US were foreign vehicles. So that's what we have right now. So there are 2 official tariffs on the table. The general for Canada and Mexico of 25%, and the 25% additional tariff on aluminum and steel. The others are still a threat.
Well, let me ask you this then, because as you know, the initial threats of imposing tariffs on Mexico and Canada were linked to the demands by Donald Trump that Mexico reduce the flow of fentanyl and migrants to the United States. And the same demand was made to Canada. And Canada, of course, is saying, only 1% of the fentanyl that enters the United States comes from Canada. So I think they're still trying to figure out what to do. And but my understanding is that there's kind of an ongoing negotiation. That's why the Security Cabinet was in Washington this week, and we can interpret it what this list of 29 persons who were delivered or taken to the United States means in terms of these negotiations of kind of reacting to Donald Trump's demand. I know the Canadians had their security team in in Washington this week too. So what is that negotiation? How does that negotiation affect the imposition of new tariffs next week and the week after that?
Okay. As you said, the 25% general tariff on Canadian and Mexican products is tied to efforts made by Canada and Mexico in order to reduce illegal migration and illegal traffic of drugs into the United States, mostly fentanyl. Now, we also have to keep in mind that Trump thinks that one of the major indicators in order to show that the US is already great again, or whatever you want to call it, is the trade balance. And the United States has not had a trade surplus since 1975. Wow. I'm not kidding. So, for example, last year, the US had trade with 233 other countries and territories. Of those 233, 101 had a surplus against the US, mostly China, Mexico, Canada, Vietnam, Germany, and other countries. Now, what Trump is saying that in order for the US to become great again, that trade deficit has to become a trade surplus. And the way to get around that is by applying tariffs, because in that way, imports are going to be reduced, and he thinks that exports are going to grow. But what we saw during his first period in the White House is that you cannot change a trade deficit just by a negotiation. He tried to renegotiate the trade agreement with South Korea, with Mexico, and Canada. He signed this new phase one agreement with China, and in neither case, things change. With all four countries, the deficit of the US remains. Why? Because the structural conditions of the US economy have not changed in the last 2 decades.
But assuming that the US government or Trump comes out and says, yes, the Mexican government and the Canadian government have taken steps to stop the flow of fentanyl and migrants, which tariffs or which deadline would change or would be satisfied?
It would be the general tariff of 25% that would start on March the 4th.
Next week.
Next week. If he, as we expect, that there will be a last minute decision saying, okay, Canada and Mexico have done enough in order to postpone this date, that would be the only one that would be affected, because the tariff on steel and aluminum, though that is not tied to migration or drug control, and that is still on the table. So that would be a separate issue that countries are going to have to deal with.
And the deadline in April is basically, it's difficult to imagine it changing, except whatever this report says, it would depend on each country, correct?
Yes, and he says that in April, he asked for all of this information in order to design these reciprocal tariffs, which would be applied on a country-by-country basis, which is something that has never been done, since that's not a rule by the World Trade Organization.
Right.
That he's expecting this information on April the 1st. So he's saying that these reciprocal tariffs would start the next day. That's impossible. So what we can expect is that April would be a month in which a whole bunch of other countries would start negotiations with the United States in order to prevent this. So and that's not even thinking about that there could be this other tariff on automobiles also of 25%, pharmaceutical products and semiconductors that Trump has also talked about to start sometime in April.
Oh, it seems everything very uncertain. Just one last question, because we're literally running out of time. Do you think that do you think it likely that he's going to be postponing these, at least for Mexico and Canada, postponing, well, maybe even China, because of course there's also the China threat that Donald Trump has made. But do you think he's going to postpone some of the imposition of some of these tariffs just due to the impact it has on the U.S. economy, inflation, employment?
For Trump, inflation and employment are not an issue. What he's thinking mostly is what it's going to look like the USMCA in the future. So whatever he can do in order to weaken the position of both Mexico and Canada, he's going to do it.
He's going to do
because
it.
we can see that he's not thinking about what may happen in the US. He's thinking about what might be the position of the US vis-a-vis Canada and Mexico going into this negotiation, which I think would be better if we start sooner this year rather than waiting until next year and continue this uncertainty, which helps absolutely no one.
Jorge Molina, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
My friend, as usual, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much.